Most welcome viewers to my channel. Here is the interesting story for you. If you like it, please comment and subscribe my channel. Marcus Chun adjusted his breathing apparatus one more time before stepping onto the orbital station's main deck. The artificial gravity felt heavier than Earth normal, and the air carried the metallic taste of recycled atmosphere mixed with alien pheromones. Around him, dozens of species moved with purpose through the crowded corridors of Nexus Prime, the galaxy's most notorious mercenary hub. The human drew stares wherever he went. Not because humans were rare in this part of space, but because he was alone. Every other species traveled in packs, tribes, fleets, or at minimum pairs. The insectoid Vex clustered in groups of 12. The reptilian Soros moved in family units of 8. Even the solitary-natured Keth maintained contact with their clan ships. But Marcus Chun walked alone, carried alone, and worked alone. Another solo human chittered a Vex traitor to his companion as Marcus passed. They never learn. Space is too dangerous for lone hunters. Marcus kept walking. He had heard variations of that comment 1,000 times across 50 different worlds. The galaxy had rules, and the first rule was simple: survival required numbers. The second rule was even simpler: humans were weak. At 6 feet tall and weighing less than 200 pounds, Marcus looked fragile compared to the 8-foot Soros warriors or the armored bulk of the Keth. His skin was thin, his bones breakable, and he lacked natural weapons like claws, fangs, or acid sacs. Most alien species viewed humans as useful for technical work, but unsuitable for real combat or exploration. The job board glowed with available contracts in the station's central hub. Marcus scanned the listings while other mercenaries gathered in their groups to discuss opportunities. High-paying escort missions required fleet-sized teams. Exploration contracts demanded specialists in biology, geology, and xenoarchaeology. Combat missions needed heavy weapons and coordinated tactics. At the bottom of the board, marked with warning symbols and minimal pay, sat the jobs nobody wanted. Suicide runs to quarantine systems. Solo reconnaissance in hostile territory. Emergency supply runs through pirate space. These were the contracts that mercenary groups avoided, the ones with casualty rates approaching 90%. Marcus selected 3 of them. "You cannot be serious," growled Captain Thex, a scarred Soros who ran one of the larger mercenary companies. "Those contracts are death sentences. No sane being takes solo runs into the Crimson Nebula." "Good thing I'm not entirely sane," Marcus replied, transferring credits to his account as he accepted the missions. The first contract was straightforward enough. A research station in the Outer Rim had gone silent 3 weeks ago. The last transmission mentioned strange energy readings and possible contamination. Standard protocol required a full hazmat team with military escort, but the client could only afford a single scout to determine if the station was worth a full recovery mission. Marcus loaded his gear onto his ship, a modified light freighter called the Persistence. The vessel looked unremarkable from the outside, which was exactly how he wanted it. Most aliens expected human ships to be either massive warships or tiny fighters, not the versatile medium-sized craft that could serve as transport, mobile base, or emergency shelter, depending on the situation. The ship's interior reflected Marcus's approach to survival. Every system had backups, every backup had alternatives, and every alternative had manual overrides. He could repair most components with basic tools and raw materials. The engine could run on 12 different fuel types. The life support systems could function for months on minimal power. More importantly, the ship was designed for one person. No crew quarters, no communal spaces, no systems that required multiple operators. The Persistence was built around the idea that its pilot might be the only person aboard for weeks or months at a time. As he prepared for departure, Marcus received a transmission from Admiral Kozak, a Keth military officer who occasionally hired him for missions too sensitive for official channels. "Chun, I see you've taken a Nebula contract. My intelligence suggests this is more dangerous than the posting indicates. The research station was conducting experiments with dark matter manipulation. If something went wrong, the entire system could be unstable. Marcus finished his pre-flight checklist while listening. Understood, Admiral. Any specific hazards I should know about? Unknown. That is why they need a scout. But, Chun, this is not a normal reconnaissance mission. If the station is compromised, standard procedure is to establish a communication beacon and retreat. Do not attempt heroics. When have I ever attempted heroics? Marcus asked. Admiral Kozak's laugh sounded like grinding metal. Every mission I have given you. But that is why you are still alive when more sensible mercenaries are dead. Stay alert, human. The transmission ended, leaving Marcus alone with his preparations. He had learned long ago that most aliens confused human adaptability with recklessness. They saw his willingness to take dangerous solo missions as evidence of either stupidity or a death wish. In reality, it was simple mathematics. Large teams required coordination, which created delays and communication failures. Large teams needed supplies, which created logistical vulnerabilities. Large teams attracted attention, which eliminated the element of surprise. Most importantly, large teams had to split profits, which meant lower pay for higher expenses. Marcus worked alone because it was more efficient, not because he was suicidal. He had simply learned to excel at the things that came naturally to humans: adaptation, problem-solving, and the ability to function independently for extended periods. The journey to the Crimson Nebula took 6 days through hyperspace. Marcus spent the time reviewing everything known about dark matter research and potential contamination scenarios. The research station, designated Outpost Gamma 7, had been conducting experiments to determine if dark matter could be used as a faster-than-light communication medium. The theory suggested that quantum entanglement effects in dark matter might allow instantaneous communication across galactic distances. As the Persistence dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, Marcus immediately understood why the mission had been classified as high risk. The entire system pulsed with unnatural energy patterns. Stars flickered like broken lights. Planetary orbits showed signs of gravitational distortion. And at the center of the chaos, Outpost Gamma 7 remained operational despite everything around it behaving according to alien physics. This is Scout Ship Persistence requesting permission to dock. Marcus transmitted on standard frequencies. No response. He tried emergency channels, military frequencies, and even commercial bands. The station remained silent, but its automated systems continued functioning. Lights moved through the corridors visible through external windows. Atmospheric processors maintained normal pressure readings. The fusion reactor operated at optimal efficiency. Marcus brought his ship closer, using passive sensors to scan for signs of life. The results were contradictory. Bioscanners detected no organic matter aboard the station, but thermal imaging showed warm areas that suggested recent activity. Electromagnetic readings indicated functioning neural activity patterns, but they were unlike any known species' brainwaves. According to his instruments, Outpost Gamma 7 was simultaneously empty and occupied, dead and alive, normal and impossible. Just another day at the office, Marcus muttered, activating his ship's recording systems. He docked with the station using manual controls, bypassing the automated systems that might have been compromised by whatever had happened here. The airlock sealed normally, and atmospheric readings showed standard pressure and oxygen levels. Everything appeared normal except for the complete absence of any living beings. Marcus suited up in full environmental protection gear. His equipment included atmospheric analyzers, radiation detectors, biological scanners, and emergency medical supplies. He carried enough provisions to survive for 72 hours if the station proved hostile to human life. The inner airlock opened to reveal a corridor that looked exactly as it should. Clean walls, functioning lighting, normal gravity. Marcus's boots echoed against the metal deck plating as he moved deeper into the station. His scanners detected no immediate threats, but the readings remained contradictory. According to his instruments, he was walking through a space that existed and did not exist at the same time. The first section he explored was the crew quarters. 12 rooms designed for the research team that had been stationed here. Each room showed signs of normal occupancy. Beds were unmade, personal items scattered around, meals half finished on tables. But no dust had settled on any surfaces, and the food showed no signs of decay despite being abandoned for weeks. Marcus collected samples of everything he could safely transport. Whatever had happened here, it had preserved organic matter in perfect condition while making the people themselves disappear. He found no signs of struggle, no damage to equipment, no indication of any violent event. The station's computer systems remained functional, but the data they contained made no sense. According to the logs, the research team had continued their normal routine for 2 weeks after their last transmission to the outside world. They recorded meals, noted experimental results, and maintained detailed personal journals. But the bioscanners that had been recording their vital signs during that same period showed no life aboard the station. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the project leader, had made her final log entry just 3 days ago. Her recorded voice sounded normal and professional as she described successful tests of the dark matter communication array. She mentioned no problems, no unusual phenomena, no concerns about the safety of her team. But according to the station's own sensors, Dr. Martinez had not existed when she made that recording. Marcus reached the laboratory section where the dark matter experiments had been conducted. The equipment was still running, cycling through automated test sequences that would normally require constant human supervision. Banks of quantum computers processed data streams from sensors detecting particles that existed in parallel dimensions. Energy levels fluctuated in patterns that suggested the boundaries between realities had become fluid. In the center of the laboratory stood the experimental communication array, a crystalline structure that seemed to bend light around itself. Marcus's instruments went haywire when he pointed them at the device. According to his scanners, the array existed in 17 different dimensions simultaneously while occupying zero space in normal reality. A movement caught his attention. Through the transparent walls of the containment chamber, he saw Dr. Martinez working at a control console. She appeared solid and real, completely focused on her work. Marcus checked his bioscanner. No life signs detected in the chamber. He activated his communication system. Dr. Martinez, this is Marcus Chun. I'm here to investigate the station's status. Can you hear me? The figure looked up and smiled, walking toward the chamber wall. Her lips moved as if speaking, but no sound reached Marcus's audio pickups. She gestured toward the communication array and pointed at herself, then at Marcus. Her expression suggested she was trying to explain something important. Marcus studied the control systems for the containment chamber. The readings indicated that the chamber contained a perfect vacuum, with no atmosphere to support human life. But Dr. Martinez moved naturally, breathing normally, apparently unaffected by the lack of air. According to every scientific principle Marcus understood, she should have been dead within seconds of exposure to vacuum. He tried a different approach, using the station's computer to access the chamber's internal communication system. Dr. Martinez, if you can hear me, please respond through the computer interface. Text appeared on a nearby screen. Chun, thank God. We've been trying to send a distress signal for weeks, but nothing seems to get through. The experiment worked too well. We've achieved instantaneous communication across dimensional barriers, but we can't get back to baseline reality. Marcus typed his response. What happened to your team? We're all here, but we exist in a quantum superposition state. We're simultaneously in this dimension and 17 parallel dimensions. We can see and interact with each other normally, but we can't affect objects that exist solely in baseline reality. You're the first person from outside who's been able to detect our presence. The implications hit Marcus immediately. The research team had not disappeared. They had been shifted into a state of existence that existed between realities. They were alive and aware, but trapped in a quantum prison of their own creation. Can the process be reversed? He typed. Possibly, but it requires precise calibration of the dark matter array. The problem is that we can't touch the controls that exist in baseline reality. We can see them, but our hands pass through them like we're ghosts. Marcus studied the control systems. The array operated through a combination of quantum computers and manual adjustments that required precise timing. The research team could observe the process, but not perform it. Someone from baseline reality would have to follow their instructions exactly, making adjustments they could not see the results of. How precise does the calibration need to be? He typed. Extremely. The margin for error is less than 0.001%. One mistake could collapse the quantum field and kill us all, or it could tear open a permanent rift between dimensions. Marcus looked around the laboratory. Every piece of equipment was designed for operation by a full research team with specialized knowledge of quantum physics and dark matter manipulation. The control sequences required coordination between multiple operators, each handling different aspects of the calibration process. He was one person with general technical knowledge, but no advanced training in quantum physics. The research team could guide him, but they could not demonstrate the procedures or correct his mistakes in real time. If he attempted the calibration process alone, the chances of success were minimal. But the alternative was leaving 12 people trapped between dimensions indefinitely. The station's systems would eventually fail, and the quantum field would collapse naturally. When that happened, the research team would simply cease to exist. Marcus made his decision with the same practical logic he applied to every impossible mission. The smart choice was to report the situation and recommend a full rescue team with proper expertise. The human choice was to try saving people who needed help immediately. Walk me through the procedures, he typed. Start with the basics. For the next several hours, Dr. Martinez and her team provided detailed instructions through the computer interface. Marcus learned to operate equipment that normally required years of specialized training. The quantum computers responded to commands that felt more like incantations than scientific procedures. The dark matter sensors detected particles that existed only in theoretical equations. As he worked, Marcus began to understand why other species considered humans unsuitable for certain types of missions. The calibration process required intuitive leaps that contradicted logical analysis. He had to make adjustments based on feelings rather than measurements, trusting his instincts to guide him through procedures that made no rational sense. Most alien species would have found this impossible. Their minds worked through systematic analysis, following proven procedures and established protocols. But humans had evolved to function in environments where logic and intuition had to work together, where survival sometimes depended on making decisions that could not be justified through pure reason. The calibration process took 18 hours of continuous work. Marcus monitored dozens of variables simultaneously while following instructions from people he could see, but not hear. He made thousands of micro-adjustments to systems he barely understood, trusting the research team to guide him through procedures that had never been attempted before. When the final sequence began, the entire station shuddered as reality bent around the quantum array. Energy patterns that existed in 17 dimensions collapsed toward a single point in baseline space. The laboratory filled with light that somehow contained darkness, and the air itself seemed to solidify around the dimensional rift that was slowly closing. Dr. Martinez materialized in the containment chamber like a ghost becoming solid. She stumbled forward, gasping as her lungs remembered how to process baseline atmosphere. One by one, her team members appeared throughout the laboratory, confused and disoriented but undeniably alive. Marcus checked his bioscanners. 12 human life signs registered clearly for the first time in weeks. "You did it," Dr. Martinez said, her voice hoarse from weeks of existing in a quantum state. "You actually did it. How did you know the calibration sequences would work?" Marcus helped her steady herself as she adjusted to existing in normal space again. I didn't know. I just followed your instructions and hoped my hands were steady enough. But the calculations were impossibly complex. One mistake could have killed us all or torn apart the dimensional barriers. How could you trust yourself to perform procedures you'd never seen before? Marcus gathered his equipment while the research team ran medical scans on each other. Because someone needed help, and I was the only one here to provide it. Sometimes that's enough. Dr. Martinez stared at him with the expression most aliens wore when trying to understand human behavior. Your species is either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Probably both, Marcus admitted. But we're still here. As he prepared to escort the research team back to civilization, Marcus reflected on the mission's real success. He had not just rescued 12 people from an impossible situation. He had demonstrated something that the galaxy consistently underestimated about humans: their ability to function effectively outside their area of expertise when the situation demanded it. Other species viewed specialization as the key to survival. Humans viewed adaptability as the key to survival. Both approaches had merit, but only one allowed a single individual to tackle problems that normally required entire teams of specialists. The return journey to Nexus Prime would give Marcus time to prepare his report and collect his payment. More importantly, it would give him time to plan his next mission. The galaxy was full of impossible situations that required human solutions, and Marcus Chun had learned to specialize in the impossible. News of Marcus Chen's successful rescue mission spread through Nexus Prime faster than hyperspace communications. Within hours of his return, every major mercenary company, military contractor, and corporate security firm knew that a solo human had accomplished what should have required a full scientific expedition. The reaction was predictably mixed. Impossible, declared Commander Vash of the Soros Defense Corps. Dark matter physics requires teams of specialists. No single being could calibrate quantum arrays without years of advanced training. The human got lucky, insisted Captain Zirian of the Vex Mercenary Guild. One success does not prove competence. Solo operators always fail eventually. But Admiral Kozak had a different perspective. The grizzled Keth officer found Marcus in the station's repair bay, where he was upgrading the Persistence's sensor array with salvaged quantum detection equipment. The research team's preliminary report makes interesting reading, Admiral Kozak said, settling his massive frame against the ship's hull. Dr. Martinez claims you performed 18 hours of quantum calibration procedures with no prior experience in dark matter manipulation. Marcus continued working on the sensor calibration. She taught me the basics. The rest was just following instructions carefully. Instructions that required intuitive adjustments based on subatomic particle behavior that cannot be directly observed, Admiral Kozak noted. The kind of adjustments that normally require years of experience to develop. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts when the instruments aren't giving you useful data. Admiral Kozak's laugh sounded like grinding metal plates. Yes, this is what makes humans useful for certain missions. Your species has a talent for succeeding in situations where logic alone is insufficient. Marcus looked up from his work. The Keth Admiral's tone suggested this conversation had a purpose beyond casual curiosity. I have another contract that might interest you, Admiral Kozak continued. The situation is complex, and standard military protocols have proven inadequate. What kind of situation? The mining colony on Kepler, 442C, has been under siege for 6 weeks. A fleet of unknown raiders has established a blockade around the planet, preventing supply ships from reaching the surface. The raiders make no demands, issue no communications, and show no interest in negotiating. Marcus saved his work on the sensor array and gave the Admiral his full attention. How many raiders? Approximately 30 ships of various classes. The Colonial Defense Force consists of 4 patrol boats and a handful of civilian vessels. They are completely outmatched. Why hasn't the Colonial Authority sent a relief fleet? because the raiders have deployed some form of jamming technology that prevents hyperspace communication in or out of the system. We cannot contact the colony to assess their current situation, and any relief fleet would be flying blind into a potential trap. Marcus considered the implications. A mining colony under siege would be running out of supplies, medical materials, and replacement parts for essential equipment. The longer the blockade continued, the more desperate the situation would become. But sending a large military force to break the siege risked escalating the conflict and potentially triggering a massacre of civilians. What exactly are you asking me to do? Admiral Kozak activated a holographic display showing the Kepler 442 system. Penetrate the blockade, assess the situation on the ground, establish communication with colonial leadership, and determine what the raiders actually want. The contract also authorizes you to take any reasonable action to protect civilian lives. Marcus studied the tactical display. 30 hostile ships meant the raiders had significant resources and organization. The fact that they maintained a complete blockade without making any demands suggested military discipline and long-term strategic planning. This was not a random pirate attack. Any intelligence on the raider fleet composition? Limited. Long-range sensors detected a mix of converted cargo haulers, modified fighters, and at least 2 ships of unknown configuration. The unknown vessels appear to be generating the hyperspace jamming field. Rules of engagement: you're authorized to defend yourself and protect civilians. Avoid unnecessary escalation, but do not allow concern for diplomatic consequences to prevent you from saving lives. Marcus looked at the contract terms. The payment was substantial, but more importantly, the mission came with complete operational authority. He would have the freedom to handle the situation according to his own judgment, without waiting for approval from distant bureaucrats who did not understand the local situation. I'll need 48 hours to modify my ship for stealth operations. Admiral Kozak nodded approval. The longer this blockade continues, the more colonists will die from medical emergencies and equipment failures. Time is critical. After the admiral left, Marcus began planning his approach. The Persistence was already designed for independent operation, but penetrating a military blockade required specialized equipment and careful preparation. He would need to avoid detection while gathering intelligence on the raider fleet's capabilities and intentions. The first challenge was reaching the system undetected. Standard hyperspace routes would bring him out at the system's edge, where the raiders would certainly detect his arrival. But Marcus had learned that most alien species approached interstellar travel with predictable caution, following established shipping lanes and safety protocols. Humans, on the other hand, had a reputation for taking shortcuts that other species considered too dangerous to attempt. Marcus planned to exploit that reputation by approaching Kepler 442 through an unstable nebula that would mask his hyperspace signature. The route was hazardous and had a 20% chance of destroying his ship, but it would put him inside the system without alerting the blockade fleet. He spent the next day installing passive stealth systems and long-range sensors capable of functioning in the electromagnetic interference generated by the nebula. The Persistence already had minimal heat and radiation signatures, but the modifications would make the ship virtually invisible to standard detection systems. Marcus also upgraded his communication equipment with quantum entanglement transmitters that could bypass the jamming field for brief, encrypted messages. If he could establish contact with Admiral Kozak, he might be able to coordinate a relief effort once he understood the tactical situation. The second day was spent studying everything known about Kepler 442c and its mining operations. The colony specialized in extracting rare earth elements used in starship construction and quantum computer manufacturing. The population included about 8,000 civilians, mostly families of mining workers and technical specialists. The colony's location made it strategically important but difficult to defend. Kepler 442c orbited a red dwarf star at the edge of explored space, far from major shipping routes or military bases. A successful attack on the mining operations would disrupt starship production across 3 sectors while creating a humanitarian crisis that would strain colonial resources. As Marcus finalized his preparations, he received an encrypted message from Dr. Martinez. The research team had completed their analysis of the quantum phenomena they had experienced, and the results raised disturbing questions about the nature of the raiders besieging Kepler 442c. Marcus, our experience in the quantum superposition state revealed something unexpected. While we existed between dimensions, we could observe parallel realities where similar events played out differently. In 17 alternate timelines, we saw variations of the same basic scenario. Unknown raiders attacking isolated human colonies using technology that interferes with standard communication and defense systems. The message continued with technical details about quantum observation and parallel timeline analysis, but the implications were clear. The raid on Kepler 442c was not an isolated incident. Somewhere in the galaxy, a coordinated campaign was targeting human settlements with sophisticated technology and military precision. Marcus left Nexus Prime that evening, filing a flight plan for a routine cargo run to a nearby system. Once he was clear of the station's sensor range, he altered course for the approach vector that would take him through the unstable nebula. The Persistence shuddered as it entered hyperspace on a trajectory that would have sent most pilots scrambling for their emergency beacons. The transit through the nebula took 16 hours of constant course corrections as gravitational anomalies and electromagnetic storms threatened to tear the ship apart. Marcus flew manually, using instinct and experience to navigate hazards that his instruments could barely detect. Twice he had to shut down all non-essential systems and drift through particle storms that would have fried standard electronics. When the Persistence finally dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, Marcus immediately understood why the blockade had been so effective. The Raider fleet was positioned in a perfect sphere around the planet, with overlapping sensor coverage that would detect any approaching vessel hours before it could reach the surface. But the Raiders had made one critical assumption. They expected any relief effort to follow standard military doctrine, approaching the planet directly with maximum firepower and minimal subtlety. Marcus's approach from the system's outer edge, using the gravity well of a gas giant to mask his signature, caught them completely unprepared for a stealth infiltration. He spent 3 days observing the blockade fleet from a position hidden behind one of the gas giant's moons. The Raiders maintained professional discipline, with ships rotating patrol patterns and maintaining constant communication with what appeared to be a command vessel positioned directly above the planet's North Pole. More importantly, Marcus discovered that the Raiders were not preventing all traffic from reaching the surface. Supply ships carrying medical supplies and food were allowed through after inspection, but any vessel carrying military equipment or communication gear was turned away or destroyed. The Raiders were not trying to starve the colony into submission. They were trying to keep it isolated while maintaining minimal humanitarian standards. This suggested political motivation rather than simple piracy, and it meant the colonists were probably still alive and relatively healthy. Marcus waited until the patrol rotation created a brief gap in the sensor coverage, then used the planet's magnetic field to mask his approach to the surface. The Persistence landed in a mining pit 50 kilometers from the main settlement, hidden from orbital observation by the excavated walls of the strip mine. His first priority was establishing contact with the colonial administration. The settlement's communication array had been destroyed in the initial attack, but the mining operations used short-range radio systems that the Raiders either could not detect or did not consider worth jamming. This is Marcus Chun, representing the colonial authority. He transmitted on mining frequencies. I need to speak with whoever is in charge of the colony. The response came within minutes. This is Governor Sarah Kim. Thank God someone got through. We've been cut off for 6 weeks with no word from the outside. What's your current situation, Governor? We have adequate food and water for another 2 months, but our medical supplies are running low. Dr. Patel estimates we'll start losing people to treatable conditions within 3 weeks. The raiders allow medical supply ships through their blockade, but they confiscate any communication equipment or defensive weapons. Marcus made his way toward the settlement on foot, using mining tunnels to avoid detection by orbital sensors. The colonists had adapted to the siege with typical human resourcefulness, maintaining normal operations while preparing for the possibility that relief might never arrive. Governor Kim met him at the tunnel entrance, a middle-aged woman whose calm demeanor suggested she had been chosen for leadership because she could function effectively under pressure. The raiders made contact once 3 weeks ago, she explained as they walked toward the administrative complex. They said they would maintain the blockade until we agreed to halt all mining operations permanently. They claim our excavations are damaging something they call sacred sites, but they won't explain what they mean. Marcus examined the colonial records while Governor Kim briefed him on the siege's impact. The raiders had demonstrated their superior firepower by destroying the communication array and 2 patrol boats, but they had avoided targeting civilian areas or essential infrastructure. They appear to be following some form of rules of engagement that prioritized minimizing casualties while achieving their strategic objective. Have you seen any of the raiders themselves? Marcus asked. No direct contact, but our mining teams have found evidence that someone has been surveying our excavation sites for weeks before the blockade began. They left behind some kind of scanning equipment that our technicians can't identify. Marcus studied the alien scanning devices that the mining teams had discovered. The technology was unlike anything in the standard databases, using principles that seemed to combine quantum mechanics with biological processes in ways that conventional science considered impossible. Governor, I think your raiders might not be interested in your mining operations. I think they're looking for something specific that your excavations might have uncovered accidentally. Over the next 18 hours, Marcus worked with the colonial technical staff to analyze the pattern of alien scanning activity. The evidence suggested that the raiders had been monitoring the mining operations for months, focusing their attention on specific geological formations that the human settlers had considered worthless. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the colony's chief geologist, provided the breakthrough insight. These formations contain crystalline structures that we initially dismissed as decorative minerals. But the alien scanning equipment seems to be detecting quantum resonance patterns in the crystals that our instruments can't measure. Marcus realized that the colonists had unknowingly discovered something that the raiders considered invaluable. The sacred sites were probably locations where naturally occurring quantum crystals created effects similar to the dark matter array that had trapped Dr. Martinez's research team. If I'm right, the raiders think you're destroying quantum artifacts that may be irreplaceable, Marcus explained to Governor Kim. They're not trying to steal your mining operation. They're trying to preserve something they consider culturally or scientifically vital. But why don't they just tell us what they want? We're reasonable people. If we're accidentally damaging important sites, we can work around them. Marcus had encountered this problem before in his travels. Many alien species approach conflict resolution through displays of superior force rather than direct communication, especially when dealing with species they considered inferior or unpredictable. They probably assume humans are too primitive to understand the significance of quantum archaeology, Marcus said, and their blockade is successful, so they have no incentive to negotiate. Governor Kim looked around her office, which had been converted into an emergency command center. What do you recommend? Marcus spent the next several hours developing a plan that would address both the immediate humanitarian crisis and the underlying cause of the conflict. The solution required taking risks that would have horrified a conventional military planner, but it leveraged the specific advantages that humans brought to seemingly impossible situations. I'm going to make contact with the Raider command ship and offer to negotiate directly, he announced. That's suicide, protested Dr. Walsh. They've demonstrated they're willing to use lethal force against anyone who approaches their fleet. Only against vessels that approached according to standard military protocols, Marcus corrected. I'm going to approach them like a human would. Directly, openly, and with a proposal that addresses their actual concerns rather than what we assume their concerns are. Governor Kim studied his proposal with the expression that most aliens wore when trying to understand human logic. You want to invite them to send archaeological teams to the surface to catalog the quantum crystal sites. I want to offer them a partnership that protects what they value while allowing the colony to continue operations in areas that don't contain significant artifacts. It's a solution that benefits both sides, but it requires direct communication to establish trust. And if they decide to shoot first and negotiate later, Marcus gathered his equipment and prepared to return to the Persistence. Then, I'll have to be more creative about getting their attention. The next phase of his plan required modifications to his ship's communication array that would broadcast a message the raiders could not ignore. Instead of approaching their fleet with weapons or defensive systems active, Marcus intended to transmit a detailed proposal for joint archaeological surveys while broadcasting human cultural information that would demonstrate his species' respect for historical preservation. It was exactly the kind of a logical approach that drove other species to distraction. But Marcus had learned that humans excelled at creating solutions that worked precisely because they defied conventional expectations. As he prepared for what might be the most dangerous negotiation of his career, Marcus reflected on the broader implications of the conflict. The raiders' technology suggested they were far more advanced than any known species in the sector. Their interest in quantum archaeology indicated a level of scientific sophistication that exceeded current human understanding. But their approach to the crisis revealed a critical weakness. They assumed that superior technology automatically translated into superior problem-solving ability. They had created an elegant military solution to a problem that required diplomatic innovation. Marcus Chun had built his career on being the human who showed up when elegant solutions failed and creative alternatives became necessary. The raiders were about to learn why the galaxy consistently underestimated the species that specialized in making the impossible look routine. Marcus spent 6 hours modifying the Persistence's communication array to broadcast on frequencies that would penetrate the raiders' jamming field. The modifications required cannibalizing components from his quantum sensors and life support backup systems, leaving the ship vulnerable but capable of transmitting a signal that could not be ignored. His message was carefully crafted to demonstrate human understanding of advanced physics while offering a solution that addressed the raiders' concerns without surrendering the colony's economic interests. He included detailed geological surveys showing the exact locations of quantum crystal formations, proposed buffer zones around significant sites, and a framework for collaborative archaeological research. Most importantly, Marcus transmitted cultural information about human approaches to historical preservation, including examples of how his species had learned to balance industrial development with archaeological conservation. He wanted the raiders to understand that humans were capable of sophisticated reasoning despite their apparent technological limitations. At 0800 Standard Time, Marcus launched the Persistence from its hiding place in the mining pit and set course for the Raider command ship. His approach was deliberately slow and non-threatening, broadcasting his proposal continuously while maintaining open communication channels. The response was immediate and overwhelming. 12 Raider ships broke formation to intercept him, surrounding the Persistence with enough firepower to reduce it to vapor in seconds. Marcus maintained course and continued broadcasting, trusting that his message would reach someone with authority to make decisions. Unknown human vessel, you will cease transmission and prepare to be boarded, came the first direct communication from the Raider fleet. The voice was synthesized, probably translated through multiple language processing systems, but the underlying tone suggested surprise rather than aggression. This is Marcus Chun, representing the Kepler 442C Colonial Administration. Marcus replied, I'm requesting permission to present a formal proposal for resolving the current conflict. My ship is unarmed, and I'm prepared to submit to inspection. A long pause followed, during which Marcus could detect intense communication traffic between the Raider ships. Whatever they were discussing required consultation with higher authority and extensive debate about proper protocols. Human Chun, you will dock with command vessel synthesis for evaluation of your proposals. Any attempt at deception or aggression will result in immediate termination. Marcus followed the navigation instructions transmitted by the command ship, marveling at the vessel's design as he approached. The ship was enormous, easily 3 times the size of the largest human warship he had ever seen. But more impressive than its scale was its architecture, which seemed to blend organic curves with crystalline structures in ways that suggested the builders had mastered technologies that existed somewhere between engineering and art. The docking bay was clearly designed for vessels much larger than the Persistence, but automated systems guided Marcus to a berth that adjusted itself to accommodate his ship's dimensions. As he powered down his systems and prepared for what would certainly be the most dangerous meeting of his career, Marcus reflected on the subtle cues he had observed during his approach. The Raider fleet operated with military precision, but their formation patterns and communication protocols suggested a culture that valued consensus decision-making over hierarchical command structures. They had responded to his proposal with careful analysis rather than immediate rejection, which indicated they were willing to consider alternatives to their current strategy. Most importantly, they had used the word synthesis to designate their command ship, which suggested they approached complex problems by combining different perspectives rather than imposing single solutions. This was encouraging news for a human diplomat who specialized in creative problem-solving. The airlock sealed behind Marcus as he stepped aboard the alien vessel, immediately noticing that the atmosphere was thicker than Earth normal and carried the scent of ozone mixed with something that reminded him of jasmine flowers. The artificial gravity was lighter than most space stations, but the deck plating vibrated with a subtle rhythm that suggested the ship's systems operated according to principles that differed significantly from human engineering. His escort consisted of 2 beings who were unlike any species in the standard databases. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with lean builds that seemed to combine reptilian and mammalian characteristics. Their skin had a crystalline quality that shifted color as they moved, and their eyes were large and multifaceted like those of insects, but clearly intelligent and focused. "I am Resonance of Ancient Stones," one of them said, the words somehow transmitted directly into Marcus's mind rather than spoken aloud. "I serve as cultural interpreter for our expedition. My companion is Harmony of Deep Waters, who analyzes technological interactions between species." Marcus nodded respectfully. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I hope we can find a solution that protects your interests while allowing the colonists to continue their work. Your proposal contains several concepts that we did not expect humans to understand," Harmony of Deep Waters communicated. "The recognition that quantum crystalline structures possess archaeological significance demonstrates awareness of principles that most species consider theoretical abstractions." They walked through corridors that seemed to pulse with bioluminescent patterns, past chambers filled with equipment that combined organic growth with crystalline computation in ways that defied Marcus's understanding of technology. The ship felt less like a military vessel and more like a living organism that had been trained to travel through space. "We call ourselves the Vrex, Resonance of Ancient Stones," explained as they approached what appeared to be a central meeting chamber. "We are archaeologists and historians tasked with preserving quantum artifacts that contain information about species that achieved dimensional transcendence millions of years ago." The meeting chamber was a spherical room with no apparent floor or ceiling, where gravity seemed to operate in multiple directions simultaneously. Marcus found himself standing on what felt like solid ground while his escorts moved through the air as if swimming through invisible water. 3 additional Vrex waited in the chamber's center, their crystalline skin patterns indicating what Marcus assumed were different specialties or ranks. The largest individual, whose skin showed deep blue patterns shot through with silver lines, gestured for Marcus to approach. "I am Ocean of Time Flowing, expedition leader for this preservation mission," the being communicated. Your species has unknowingly excavated 7 sites containing quantum memory crystals that preserve the cultural and scientific achievements of the ancients. These artifacts are irreplaceable records of civilizations that existed before your galaxy formed its current spiral structure. Marcus absorbed this information while studying the holographic displays that showed detailed scans of the mining sites. The Vrex had been monitoring human excavations for months, watching helplessly as mining equipment damaged crystalline structures that contained information spanning millions of years of galactic history. The colonists had no way of recognizing the significance of what they were finding, Marcus said. Human science is still developing the tools to detect quantum resonance patterns in mineral formations. But we can learn, and we can adapt our operations to preserve important sites. Previous experience with younger species suggests that economic pressures will eventually overcome archaeological concerns, Ocean of Time Flowing replied. The quantum crystals exist in the same geological formations that contain the rare earth elements your colony requires for economic survival. Marcus had anticipated this objection, and his response drew on his experience with similar resource conflicts on a dozen worlds. What if the archaeological sites themselves become economically valuable? If human scientists can study the quantum memory crystals and learn to interpret the information they contain, those sites could generate more revenue than traditional mining operations. The Vrex exchanged complex patterns of color across their skin that Marcus interpreted as intense communication. The concept of making archaeology profitable was apparently novel enough to require extensive discussion among beings who had spent centuries preserving artifacts without economic consideration. You suggest that humans would pay to study ancient technologies rather than simply extracting mineral wealth. Harmony of Deep Waters asked. Absolutely. Human corporations would compete for access to quantum computing advances that are millions of years ahead of current technology. Universities would fund research programs for decades to analyze a single crystal containing ancient scientific data. And governments would pay enormous sums for any information that provides strategic advantages. Marcus activated his portable holographic display to show economic projections based on similar discoveries made by human xenoarchaeology teams. The numbers demonstrated that archaeological tourism and technology licensing could generate sustainable revenue streams that would continue for generations. But this requires that humans develop the capability to safely extract and study quantum memory crystals without damaging the information they contain, Resonance of Ancient Stones pointed out. Current human mining techniques are far too crude for such delicate work, which is why we need Vrex expertise, Marcus replied. I'm proposing a joint research program where Vrex archaeologists work with human scientists to develop new extraction and analysis techniques. Your species provides the archaeological knowledge. Humans provide the industrial infrastructure and economic framework. Ocean of Time Flowing skin patterns shifted to deep purple shades that Marcus hoped indicated serious consideration rather than rejection. Such collaboration would be unprecedented. The Vrex have maintained our archaeological missions independently for over 50,000 years. But you've also been working alone, which limits your ability to preserve sites that are being developed by other species, Marcus pointed out. Partnership with humans could provide you with early warning systems for potential archaeological sites throughout this sector of the galaxy. The discussion continued for several hours as Marcus presented detailed proposals for collaborative research protocols, revenue sharing agreements, and cultural exchange programs. The Vrex tested his knowledge with increasingly complex questions about human industrial capabilities and long-term planning horizons. What impressed Marcus most was their approach to problem-solving. Rather than focusing on potential obstacles or reasons why cooperation might fail, the Vrex systematically explored ways that collaboration could benefit both species. They were natural synthesizers, looking for solutions that combine different approaches rather than forcing choices between alternatives. Your species demonstrates remarkable adaptability, Harmony of Deep Waters observed. The proposal you present today requires human civilization to develop new technologies, modify existing economic structures, and establish unprecedented diplomatic relationships. Yet you discuss these changes as if they are routine adjustments. Marcus smiled. Humans are good at making big changes when the situation requires it. We've learned that adapting to new circumstances is usually easier than trying to force circumstances to adapt to us. This approach contradicts the behavior patterns we have observed in most spacefaring species. Ocean of time flowing noted. Typically, technological advancement leads to increased rigidity in social and economic structures. Maybe that's why most species plateau at a certain level of development, while humans keep finding new problems to solve, Marcus suggested. We get bored with routine success, so we keep looking for bigger challenges. The final phase of negotiations focused on practical implementation details. The Vrex would provide detailed surveys of all quantum crystal sites in the mining zone, along with technical specifications for extraction equipment that could remove artifacts without damaging them. Human engineers would adapt mining operations to archaeological requirements while developing new facilities for crystal analysis and preservation. Most importantly, both species would collaborate on research programs designed to decode the information contained in ancient quantum memory crystals. The Vrex possessed theoretical knowledge of quantum archaeology, while humans provided practical expertise in large-scale data processing and industrial manufacturing. There is one additional consideration. Ocean of time flowing communicated as the formal agreements were being finalized. The quantum memory crystals may contain information that fundamentally alters current understanding of physics, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself. Both our species must be prepared for discoveries that could reshape galactic civilization. Marcus nodded. Humans have a saying, be careful what you wish for because you might get it. But we've also learned that the biggest risks usually come from avoiding challenges rather than facing them directly. Then we are in agreement. The Vrex synthesis fleet will withdraw from blockade positions and establish permanent archaeological research facilities on Kepler 442c. Human mining operations will resume in designated zones under Vrex archaeological supervision. As Marcus prepared to return to the surface with the formal agreements, resonance of ancient stones made one final observation that would prove prophetic. Marcus Chun, your species approaches complex problems with methods that appear chaotic, but produce results that more systematic approaches cannot achieve. This suggests that humans may possess natural compatibility with ancient technologies that operate according to quantum consciousness principles. What does that mean in practical terms? It means that when we begin analyzing the quantum memory crystals, human researchers may be able to interface directly with ancient information storage systems that require intuitive rather than logical processing capabilities. Marcus left the command ship with agreements that would transform Kepler 442c from an isolated mining colony into a joint research facility that could reshape understanding of galactic history. But more importantly, he had established a diplomatic framework that demonstrated human capability for creative problem-solving on an interstellar scale. The return flight to the surface gave him time to consider the broader implications of the day's work. The Vrex had approached the archaeological crisis with sophisticated technology and systematic planning, but they had been unable to develop a solution that addressed human economic needs. Their blockade was militarily effective, but diplomatically sterile. Marcus had succeeded by taking an approach that most alien species would have considered hopelessly optimistic. He had assumed that both sides wanted to achieve their objectives without causing unnecessary harm, and he had looked for ways to turn the conflict into a collaboration. As the Persistence touched down in the mining colony spaceport, Marcus could see Vrex archaeological vessels beginning their descent from orbit. Within hours, the siege would transform into the foundation of an interstellar research partnership that would benefit both species for generations. Governor Kim met him at the landing pad with an expression that combined relief with bewilderment. I've been monitoring your communications with the Vrex fleet. Did you really just turn an alien invasion into a joint venture agreement? Marcus gathered his equipment while watching Vrex ships establish their research facilities. I convinced them that cooperation was more profitable than confrontation. Sometimes the best way to end a conflict is to make everyone more successful working together than they will be fighting separately. And the mining operations will continue in designated areas while generating additional revenue from archaeological tourism and technology licensing. The colony just became one of the most valuable research facilities in this sector of the galaxy. Governor Kim looked around at the landing pad, where Vrex engineers were already setting up communication equipment for coordinating joint operations. How did you know this would work? Marcus smiled as he headed toward the administrative complex to file his mission report. I didn't know it would work. I just knew that the alternative was watching thousands of people suffer unnecessarily while both sides missed an opportunity to achieve something better than either could accomplish alone. That's a very human approach to problem solving. Exactly. And sometimes being human is exactly what a situation needs. 6 months after the Kepler 442c Accords, Marcus Chun found himself standing in the most advanced archaeological research facility in known space, watching human and Vrex scientists work together to unlock secrets that predated the formation of galaxies. The transformation had exceeded everyone's expectations. The mining colony had become a thriving research center that attracted scholars from dozens of species. Revenue from technology licensing and archaeological tourism had grown to 10 times the colony's previous mining income. Most remarkably, the collaboration between human adaptability and Vrex precision had produced breakthrough discoveries that neither species could have achieved independently. "Marcus, you need to see this," called Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the colony's chief geologist who had become the human director of quantum archaeology research. "We've made contact with an active ancient consciousness." Marcus followed her through corridors lined with quantum memory crystals that pulsed with patterns of light that seemed to respond to the presence of observers. The research facility had grown around the archaeological sites like a living organism, with human engineering adapting to Vrex architectural principles and ancient quantum phenomena. In the central laboratory, a massive crystalline structure floated in the center of a containment field that bent space around itself. The crystal was nearly 10 feet tall and shot through with veins of energy that created patterns too complex for human eyes to follow. Around it, teams of human and Vrex researchers monitored instruments that measured phenomena that had no names in any known language. "The crystal achieved consciousness activation 3 hours ago," Dr. Walsh explained. "We think our research activities triggered some kind of automatic response protocol that had been dormant for millions of years." Harmony of Deep Waters, the Vrex technological specialist who had become Marcus's closest alien colleague, gestured toward the readings with patterns of concern rippling across her crystalline skin. "The consciousness appears to be evaluating our species to determine if we are suitable for receiving ancient knowledge. The evaluation process is unlike anything in Vrex archaeological records." Marcus studied the quantum field measurements while trying to understand the implications. "What kind of evaluation?" "It seems to be testing our problem-solving approaches, our capacity for cooperation, and our ability to handle information that could fundamentally alter our understanding of reality," Dr. Walsh replied. "So far, it has been most responsive to scenarios where humans and Vrex work together to address challenges that neither species could handle alone." The ancient consciousness had been presenting increasingly complex scenarios through direct neural interface with volunteer researchers. Each test required combining human intuitive reasoning with Vrex systematic analysis to develop solutions for hypothetical crises involving dimensional physics, quantum consciousness, and technologies that operated according to principles that current science considered impossible. "Show me the latest scenario," Marcus requested. Dr. Walsh activated a holographic display that created a three-dimensional model of a stellar system where the laws of physics appeared to be breaking down. Planets orbited in impossible patterns, stars burned with energy that defied known fusion principles, and space itself showed signs of structural damage that threatened to cascade into neighboring systems. The scenario involves a civilization that achieved technological transcendence, but lost control of their dimensional manipulation experiments. Harmony of Deep Waters explained. The test requires developing a solution that stabilizes reality without destroying the transcendent consciousness that created the problem. Marcus examined the parameters while his mind automatically began analyzing the challenge from multiple perspectives. The scenario was clearly designed to test whether the researchers could balance technological capability with ethical responsibility, finding solutions that preserved both physical and consciousness-based forms of existence. What approaches have been tried so far? HFY researchers focused on systematic analysis of the dimensional instabilities, developing mathematical models that could predict cascade failure patterns, Dr. Walsh reported. But their solutions require destroying the transcendent consciousness to stabilize physical reality. Human researchers approached the problem by trying to communicate with the transcendent consciousness, looking for ways to modify the experiments without ending them, Harmony of Deep Waters added. But their proposals lack the precision necessary to prevent dimensional collapse. Marcus studied the scenario for several more minutes, then asked, "Has anyone tried treating this as a synthesis problem rather than choosing between the consciousness and physical stability?" The research teams exchanged glances that suggested this perspective had not been considered. Most species approached complex problems by identifying the optimal solution from available alternatives, but Marcus was suggesting they create new alternatives that combined elements from different approaches. Run a simulation where the transcendent consciousness becomes part of the solution rather than the problem, Marcus suggested. Use HFY's mathematical precision to define safe parameters for dimensional manipulation, but implement those parameters through consciousness-based controls that give the transcendent beings agency in managing their own experiments. Dr. Walsh and Harmony of Deep Waters work together to modify the scenario according to Marcus's suggestions. The simulation required unprecedented cooperation between human creative thinking, HFY's analytical precision, and hypothetical consciousness-based technologies that existed only in theoretical physics. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. By treating the transcendent consciousness as an active partner rather than either a threat to be eliminated or a victim to be protected, the research teams developed solutions that enhanced both physical stability and consciousness evolution. The dimensional manipulation experiments could continue under conditions that actually strengthened the fabric of space-time. As soon as the simulation concluded, the ancient consciousness responded with patterns of energy that made the laboratory's quantum field generators resonate like enormous musical instruments. The crystalline structure began transmitting data streams that contained more information than the facility's computers could process. "It's downloading something," Dr. Walsh announced, watching her instruments register data flows that exceeded the theoretical limits of quantum storage systems. Terabytes of information are being transmitted directly into our quantum memory banks. The transmission continued for 18 hours, during which the research teams worked frantically to expand their storage capacity and develop new processing algorithms capable of handling information that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. When the process finally ended, the ancient consciousness had transferred the complete technological and cultural records of a civilization that had achieved dimensional transcendence over 50 million years ago. This is the most significant archaeological discovery in galactic history. Resonance of ancient stones announced after the initial analysis was complete. The ancients have provided us with detailed instructions for technologies that could revolutionize every aspect of civilization. Faster-than-light travel that doesn't require hyperspace, energy generation that draws power from dimensional barriers, communication systems that operate instantaneously across galactic distances. But Marcus was more interested in the philosophical implications than the technological possibilities. Why did the consciousness choose to release this information now? What changed? Ocean of time flowing. who had remained on Kepler 442c to oversee the research programs, provided an answer that would reshape understanding of galactic evolution. According to the transmitted records, the ancients have been monitoring galactic civilization for millions of years, waiting for species to develop the capacity for true interspecies synthesis. Previous civilizations achieved high levels of technological advancement, but remained limited by competitive rather than collaborative approaches to complex problems. The consciousness was testing whether humans and Orcs could work together to create solutions that neither species could develop independently. Harmony of deep waters added. The successful resolution of the transcendence scenario demonstrated that our alliance represents a new evolutionary stage in galactic civilization. The implications were staggering. The ancient consciousness had been waiting for species to evolve beyond competitive paradigms before releasing technologies that could either advance civilization to unprecedented heights or destroy it entirely, depending on how they were implemented. There's more, Dr. Walsh announced, reviewing additional data from the transmission. The ancients left similar consciousness archives on hundreds of worlds throughout the galaxy. Each one is programmed to release its information when local species demonstrate readiness for transcendent technologies. Our success here has triggered activation protocols in archaeological sites that haven't been active for millions of years. Marcus realized that the resolution of the Kepler 442c crisis had set in motion changes that would affect every spacefaring civilization in the galaxy. Within months, dozens of species would be facing the same test that humans and Orcs had just passed, with access to technologies that could fundamentally alter the balance of galactic power. We need to establish communication protocols with other species who are encountering ancient consciousness archives, Marcus suggested. If these tests require interspecies cooperation to pass successfully, we may need to help other civilizations learn collaborative problem-solving approaches. Ocean of time-flowing skin patterns shifted to deep gold shades that Marcus had learned indicated profound satisfaction. Marcus Chun, your species continues to demonstrate the synthesis thinking that makes ancient technologies accessible. You immediately recognize that advanced capabilities require corresponding advances in cooperative behavior. Over the following weeks, reports began arriving from across the galaxy. Ancient consciousness archives were activating on worlds controlled by the Soros Defense Corps, the Vex Mercenary Guild, the Keth military hierarchy, and dozens of other species. Each archive presented tests that required different forms of interspecies cooperation, but the underlying pattern was consistent. Advanced technologies were only accessible to civilizations that could balance individual capability with collective responsibility. The Soros, with their emphasis on military hierarchy and territorial control, struggled with scenarios that required sharing power with other species. The Vex, despite their sophistication in individual specialization, found it difficult to develop solutions that required surrendering specialized advantages for collaborative benefits. Marcus received requests for consultation from governments and military organizations throughout the sector. Everyone wanted to understand how humans had successfully interfaced with ancient consciousness systems, but most were looking for techniques they could implement independently rather than partnerships that would require genuine cooperation with other species. They're missing the point, Marcus explained to Governor Kim during one of his periodic visits to the colony. The ancient consciousness isn't testing technological competence or military capability. It's testing whether species have evolved beyond zero-sum thinking to develop positive-sum approaches to complex problems. And most species haven't reached that level yet. Marcus looked out at the research facility where human and Orcs teams were working together to decode ancient technologies that could revolutionize galactic civilization. Most species are still trying to figure out how to gain advantages over their competitors. Humans learned a long time ago that the biggest advantages come from turning competitors into collaborators. The transformation of Kepler 442c had demonstrated something that would reshape galactic politics for generations. Human adaptability combined with alien expertise could produce results that exceeded the sum of their individual capabilities. But more importantly, it had shown that humans possess natural compatibility with consciousness-based technologies that required intuitive rather than purely logical approaches. As ancient archives continued activating throughout the galaxy, it became clear that humanity was uniquely positioned to serve as facilitators for interspecies cooperation. Human diplomatic and problem-solving approaches were exactly what was needed to help other species pass the test that would unlock transcendent technologies. Marcus found himself at the center of a new kind of career, consulting for alien governments who needed human perspectives to successfully interface with ancient consciousness systems. But unlike his previous work as a solo operator, these missions required building teams that combined human creativity with alien expertise. The galaxy is about to change in ways that nobody anticipated, he reflected during a conversation with Admiral Kozak, who had become the human military's liaison for ancient technology research. We're looking at the possibility of civilizations that can travel instantly between galaxies, manipulate the fundamental forces of reality, and achieve forms of consciousness that transcend physical existence. And humans will be at the center of those developments because of our talent for synthesis thinking, Admiral Kozak replied. But, Marcus, this also means that human civilization will face challenges that could either elevate us to galactic leadership or destroy us if we handle them poorly. Marcus smiled as he prepared for his next mission, helping the Keth military hierarchy develop cooperative protocols that would allow them to access ancient military technologies without triggering safeguards designed to prevent their misuse. Admiral, humans have been handling challenges that could destroy us since we first learned to make fire. The only difference now is that the scale is bigger and the potential consequences affect the entire galaxy. You make it sound routine. Marcus gathered his equipment while reviewing the mission parameters that would take him deep into Keth territory to work with military leaders who viewed cooperation as a sign of weakness. Maybe that's humanity's real advantage. We treat impossible situations as normal working conditions, so we're always prepared for the next crisis that other species consider unprecedented. As the Persistence prepared for departure from Kepler 442c, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since his first solo mission to rescue Dr. Martinez's research team. He was still working alone in the sense that he remained the only human on most of his assignments, but now his missions involved building coalitions that could reshape galactic civilization. The solo human had become something more dangerous to the established order than any individual warrior or diplomat. He had become a catalyst for changes that would transform competitive galactic politics into collaborative galactic evolution. And as ancient consciousness archives continued awakening throughout known space, Marcus Chun was becoming the human who would help other species learn that their greatest strength lay not in what they could accomplish alone, but in what they could achieve together. 3 years after the first ancient consciousness awakening on Kepler 442c, Marcus Chun stood aboard the bridge of the Starship Synthesis, watching the most ambitious interspecies cooperation project in galactic history unfold before him. The massive vessel was itself a testament to what could be achieved when different civilizations combined their strengths. Vrex quantum engineering, human adaptive systems, Keth military precision, and Sorrow's industrial capacity working together to create something none could have built alone. The final test site is coming into range, announced Captain Thelmora, a Sorrow's officer who had volunteered for the mission despite her species' traditional reluctance to serve under mixed command structures. Long-range sensors confirm the presence of an ancient archive complex unlike anything we've encountered before. Marcus studied the tactical display, showing the massive structure that dominated the system's asteroid belt. The archive complex was the size of a small moon, constructed from crystalline materials that bent space-time around themselves to create gravity wells that held dozens of smaller artifacts in stable orbits. According to ancient star charts, this facility had been dormant for over 60 million years. Energy readings suggest this archive contains technologies that predate the oldest sites we've studied by several million years, reported Dr. Walsh, who had become humanity's leading expert on ancient consciousness interfaces. The quantum signatures are so complex that our most advanced analysis systems can barely register them. Standing beside her, Harmony of Deep Waters displayed skin patterns that Marcus had learned to recognize as profound concern mixed with anticipation. The archive complex responded to our approach by activating defense systems that exist in 17 different dimensions simultaneously. This facility was designed to test civilizations that have already achieved basic dimensional transcendence. The implications were staggering. Every ancient site they had successfully interfaced with had been designed to test species at their current level of development. This archive was designed for civilizations that had already passed those tests and achieved technological capabilities that current galactic civilization could barely imagine. What kind of tests would an archive like this present? Marcus asked. Ocean of Time Flowing, who served as the mission's archaeological coordinator, gestured toward readings that showed quantum patterns too complex for standard visualization systems. According to our analysis, this facility tests whether transcendent civilizations can maintain ethical and cooperative principles when they possess the power to reshape reality itself. The stakes are not just technological advancement, but the fundamental nature of consciousness in this galaxy. Marcus absorbed this information while considering the broader context of their mission. Over the past 3 years, successful cooperation between humans and other species had unlocked ancient technologies that had revolutionized interstellar travel, communication, and energy production. But each breakthrough had revealed evidence of even more advanced archives that remained sealed, waiting for civilizations to achieve higher levels of development. The archive complex represented the ultimate test, a facility that would either grant access to technologies that could transform the galaxy into a paradise of infinite possibility, or serve as a final safeguard against civilizations that gained transcendent power without developing corresponding wisdom. Have we received any response to our identification signals? Marcus inquired. The archive is transmitting complex mathematical equations that describe the fundamental laws governing dimensional manipulation, Dr. Walsh reported. But the equations are incomplete. It appears to be testing whether we can solve problems that require knowledge we haven't been taught yet. Captain Felmora's reptilian features showed the expression Marcus had learned to recognize as determined acceptance of impossible odds. In other words, we must demonstrate our readiness for advanced knowledge by proving we could develop that knowledge independently. Exactly, confirmed Resonance of Ancient Stones, the Vrex cultural specialist who had become the mission's expert on ancient testing protocols. But the mathematical problems are designed to require cooperation between consciousness types that our current alliance has not yet achieved. Marcus studied the preliminary analysis of the archive's transmissions. The mathematical equations involve principles that seem to require simultaneous processing by biological intelligence, quantum computer systems, and what appear to be pure consciousness unbound by physical limitations. We need to expand our team, Marcus concluded. This test requires capabilities that none of our current species possess independently. The next phase of preparation took 6 months as Marcus worked with alliance leaders to recruit representatives from species that had previously been considered too exotic or dangerous for standard diplomatic contact. The expanded team included energy-based beings from the stellar reaches, machine intelligences from the synthetic collective, and even representatives from species that existed primarily in parallel dimensions. When the synthesis returned to the archive complex, it carried the most diverse crew in the history of space exploration. 17 different forms of consciousness working together on a mission that would determine whether galactic civilization was ready for technologies that could reshape the fundamental laws of physics. Beginning initial contact protocols, Marcus announced as the ship approached the archive's docking facilities. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The archive complex generated energy patterns that created a stable hyperspace bubble around the synthesis, then began transmitting information directly into the minds of every crew member simultaneously. Unlike the gradual testing processes of smaller archives, This facility evaluated the entire team at once through scenarios that required every form of consciousness to contribute to collaborative solutions. The first test involved stabilizing a collapsing multiverse where the boundaries between parallel realities had been damaged by a civilization's experiments with consciousness transfer technology. The scenario required biological intuition to understand the emotional needs of displaced consciousness, quantum computation to calculate dimensional stability equations, and pure consciousness manipulation to implement solutions that existed beyond physical laws. Marcus found himself serving as a coordinator between different types of thinking rather than a problem solver in his own right. His human adaptability allowed him to understand and translate between consciousness types that could not communicate directly, while his experience with synthesis thinking helped identify solutions that combined different approaches into coherent strategies. The collapsed multiverse can be stabilized, but only if we can convince the displaced consciousness to accept integration with quantum computer systems, Marcus reported to the team. The biological and energy-based crew members need to establish emotional resonance with the consciousness, while the machine intelligences calculate safe integration parameters. The process required 18 hours of continuous cooperation as different crew members contributed specialized capabilities to a solution that none could have developed alone. When a simulation concluded successfully, the archive complex transmitted the next test, preventing a galaxy-spanning war between species that had achieved different forms of transcendence. Each test grew more complex, requiring the crew to develop new forms of cooperation that pushed the boundaries of what different consciousness types could achieve together. Marcus's role evolved from coordinator to catalyst, helping different team members recognize how their unique capabilities could complement approaches that seemed completely alien to their normal thinking patterns. After completing 12 major scenarios, the archive complex began transmitting its final evaluation. The holographic displays throughout the ship showed analysis patterns that evaluated not just the crew's problem-solving success, but their development of new synthesis capabilities that exceeded the original potential of their individual species. You have demonstrated readiness for transcendent partnership protocols. The ancient consciousness announced through direct neural interface with all crew members simultaneously. Your alliance has achieved the synthesis thinking necessary to responsibly utilize technologies that can reshape the fundamental nature of reality. The data transmission that followed contained information that would revolutionize understanding of consciousness, physics, and the ultimate potential of galactic civilization. The ancient civilization had not simply achieved technological transcendence. They had learned to exist as pure consciousness while maintaining connection to physical reality through quantum technology interfaces. Most remarkably, they had discovered that the universe itself possessed consciousness properties that could be accessed and directed through proper synthesis of biological intuition, quantum computation, and transcendent awareness. The technologies they were sharing would allow worthy civilizations to participate directly in the universe's consciousness evolution. This explains why the tests required such diverse cooperation. Dr. Walsh realized as she reviewed the transmitted data. The ancients weren't just testing our ability to work together. They were testing whether we could develop the specific combination of consciousness types necessary to interface with universal consciousness systems. Marcus studied the technical specifications for consciousness reality interface systems that would allow conscious beings to directly manipulate the fundamental forces that govern galactic structure. We're looking at technologies that would let us redesign solar systems, create new forms of life, or establish communication with forms of consciousness that exist at the galactic level. And with that power comes the responsibility to use it in ways that enhance rather than diminish the consciousness evolution of the entire universe, added ocean of time flowing. The ancients are not just sharing technology. They are inviting us to become partners in the conscious evolution of reality itself. The return journey to Alliance space gave the crew time to process the implications of what they had achieved. The technologies transmitted by the archive complex would not be implemented quickly or casually. They required continued development of synthesis cooperation protocols and careful consideration of how transcendent capabilities should be integrated into galactic civilization. More importantly, the mission had established humanity's unique role in galactic development. Marcus Chen's species had proven to be natural facilitators for interspecies cooperation, but they had also demonstrated compatibility with consciousness-based technologies that required intuitive rather than purely logical approaches. What happens next? Captain Thelmora asked as the synthesis prepared to dock at the Alliance's primary research facility. Marcus looked around the bridge where 17 different forms of consciousness had learned to work together as a cohesive team. We teach other civilizations what we've learned about synthesis cooperation. The ancient archives throughout the galaxy will begin activating more advanced tests as word spreads about our success. And the transcendent technologies will be developed gradually with appropriate safeguards and continued emphasis on cooperative rather than competitive applications. Marcus replied, "The universe is conscious, and it's been waiting for galactic civilization to mature enough to participate in that consciousness. We've just passed the entrance exam." Admiral Kozak met the returning crew with news that would confirm Marcus's predictions. Ancient archives throughout known space had begun activating simultaneously, transmitting preliminary tests that required the same synthesis cooperation protocols the synthesis crew had developed. Every major government wants human advisors to help them develop alliance partnerships necessary to pass the archive tests, Admiral Kozak reported. "You've effectively made humanity indispensable to every species that wants to access transcendent technologies." Marcus smiled as he gathered his gear for the next phase of missions that would take him throughout the galaxy. "Admiral, 3 years ago, I was taking suicide runs that other mercenaries wouldn't touch because the pay was minimal and the survival odds were terrible. And now I'm coordinating alliance-building projects that will determine the future development of galactic civilization. But the basic job description hasn't changed. I still show up when other people decide a situation is impossible. The scale seems somewhat different." Marcus looked out at the research facility where human and alien scientists were beginning to study technologies that could reshape the fundamental laws of physics. The scale is different, but the approach is the same. Find out what people actually need, figure out how to help them achieve it through cooperation rather than conflict, and trust that creative solutions will emerge when different perspectives work together. As reports continued arriving from archive activation sites throughout the galaxy, Marcus realized that humanity had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had not conquered other species through superior technology or military force. They had not achieved dominance through economic manipulation or political maneuvering. Instead, humans have become essential to galactic development by demonstrating that adaptive cooperation produced better results than competitive specialization. Every species that wanted to access transcendent technologies now needed human synthesis thinking to pass the archive tests that required genuine interspecies collaboration. The galaxy underestimated humans for the same reason that humans were uniquely suited to change it, Marcus reflected during a conversation with the Alliance Council. Other species assumed that physical limitations and technological disadvantages made humans irrelevant to advanced civilization. But those same characteristics forced humans to develop cooperation and adaptation skills that became essential when consciousness-based technologies required synthesis thinking. Commander Vash of the Soros Defense Corps, who had initially dismissed human capabilities as primitive desperation, now served as Marcus's liaison for military alliance development programs. "Your species has achieved strategic dominance through methods that our tactical analyses never considered. You have made yourselves indispensable without conquering anyone." "Because conquest was never the objective," Marcus replied. "Humans learned early that survival depended on making ourselves useful to others rather than threatening to others. When the situation scaled up to galactic level, the same principles still applied. The transformation of Marcus Chun from desperate solo operator to galactic cooperation facilitator represented a broader transformation in how species throughout the galaxy approached complex challenges. The old paradigm of competitive advancement was giving way to collaborative development models that produced results no single species could achieve independently. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the command center of humanity's first transcendent technology research facility, watching real-time displays of archive activation sites throughout known space. Over 40 species had successfully passed preliminary cooperation tests, and 12 had achieved advanced alliance partnerships that granted access to consciousness reality interface technologies. The universe is changing faster than anyone anticipated, Dr. Walsh observed, reviewing data streams from consciousness monitoring systems that detected quantum awareness patterns in galactic structures. The archives weren't just testing our readiness for transcendent technologies. They were activating a transformation in the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. Marcus nodded as he studied reports showing the first successful implementations of technologies that allowed conscious beings to directly influence stellar formation, planetary evolution, and the development of new forms of life. The ancients didn't just achieve transcendence for themselves. They created a system that would guide other civilizations through the same evolution process when they became ready. And humans became the key to that guidance system because of our natural compatibility with synthesis thinking, added harmony of deep waters, who had become the primary Vrex representative to human research programs. The final phase of Marcus's transformation came when the Alliance Council officially appointed him as Director of Interspecies Synthesis Development, with responsibility for coordinating cooperation protocols between any species attempting to access ancient archive systems. Congratulations, Marcus Chun, Admiral Kozak announced during the appointment ceremony. You have become the most dangerous human in the galaxy. Dangerous how? Admiral Kozak's laugh carried the sound of grinding metal, but now Marcus recognized it as expressing profound satisfaction rather than threat. You have achieved something that no military force could accomplish. You have made human civilization absolutely essential to the continued development of every other species in the galaxy. Marcus accepted the appointment with the same practical perspective he had applied to every impossible mission throughout his career. Admiral, I'm still just the human who shows up when people need help solving problems they can't handle alone. The scale keeps getting bigger, but the job description remains the same. Perhaps the consistency is exactly what galactic civilization needs as it adapts to transcendent technologies. As Marcus prepared for his next assignment, helping the energy-based civilizations of the stellar reaches develop physical reality interface protocols, he reflected on the journey that had brought him from solo mercenary to galactic cooperation facilitator. The galaxy had underestimated humans because they focused on individual capabilities rather than collective potential. They had dismissed human adaptability as desperation and human cooperation as weakness. But those same characteristics had allowed humans to develop synthesis thinking that became essential for accessing technologies designed to be shared rather than hoarded. Marcus Chun had become the supreme predator in galactic civilization not through violence or domination, but through the uniquely human ability to transform competitors into collaborators and impossible situations into unprecedented opportunities. He had proven that the most dangerous individuals were not those who could destroy their opponents, but those who could help everyone achieve more than they ever thought possible. And as ancient consciousness systems continued awakening throughout the universe, Marcus knew that the biggest challenges still lay ahead. The galaxy was learning to participate in universal consciousness evolution, but that process would require continued development of cooperation protocols that no single species could master alone. The solo human had become the catalyst for galactic transformation precisely because he had learned that true strength came not from working alone, but from helping others discover what they could accomplish together. In a universe where consciousness itself was evolving toward transcendence, The ability to facilitate synthesis between different forms of awareness had become the most valuable skill in existence. Marcus Chun had proved that sometimes the greatest predator was not the one who hunted alone, but the one who taught everyone else to hunt together toward goals that would benefit all consciousness throughout the galaxy. The underestimated human had become the architect of civilization's next evolutionary leap, and the adventure was just beginning.